President-elect Trump has quickly been naming people to the administration, two embattled nominees already withdrawing after scandals, and signs they might fail Senate confirmation, the two you see there. Other jobs can be filled without a Senate vote. Today, Donald Trump tapped a convict for his White House, rehiring Peter Navarro as White House trade advisor. That's after Navarro served time for defying the January 6th probe. Navarro's made headlines for his efforts to help overthrow Trump's 2020 loss. You can see some of the headlines, both recent and past, from when I pressed him about that plot on this program. He admitted efforts to try to overthrow Trump's loss through the Congress, what he called a sweep. And these plots, you should remember, were initially underreported. They were not charged in those first few months after January 6th. But they formed this broader multi-pronged coup strategy, which was ultimately indicted by both state and federal prosecutors. Now, Navarro's answers supplied new evidence at the time. The January 6th committee subpoenaed him to testify only after that interview. He refused to testify. Congress ultimately recommended he be charged for that refusal, which led to his trial and conviction. And Trump rewarded that convicted defiance with a spot speaking at the GOP convention and now today's appointment.
The plan was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
At the same time, he was refusing to comply with our subpoena. Mr. Navarro made multiple media appearances during which he discussed his various roles in the events that culminated in the January 6th attack. I'd like to play a media clip right now.
I have so much knowledge to share with you about what I was involved in and what I know.
He has so much knowledge to share with a journalist, but he refuses to share that knowledge in response to a lawful subpoena.
They put me in handcuffs, they bring me here, they put me in leg irons, they stick me in a cell. If they can come for me, if they can come for Donald Trump, be careful, they will come for you. I was convicted for simply refusing to testify before Congress. You implicated me in some kind of crime with Donald Trump. He's been loyal to me.
Donald Trump's been loyal to him, said Navarro, but loyal for what? Peter Navarro was blunt about exactly that exchange when we spoke to him after his time serving prison time. Trump has pardoned other aides who clashed with prosecutors rather than tell the truth under oath about just what they all did in government, what they did together. Navarro's appointment new today is the latest indication that Donald Trump will continue to take any actions he can, both through the power he has in hiring and perhaps the power he has in pardoning, to protect whatever secrets they have from the past and presumably whatever else they want to do in the future. I'm joined by former FBI General Counsel and former Mueller prosecutor Andrew Weissmann. Welcome back.
Nice to be here.
You see that history, and through the hiring and perhaps through future pardons, it seems to reward something that was always antithetical to law and order, which was defying a lawful subpoena and a probe.
So it's really worth remembering that the president-elect is a felon. He has been convicted of 34 felonies. These are just facts.
Yeah.
You can look at the first Trump presidency, where he used the pardon power to pardon a series of criminals who were loyal to him, not just sort of general issues about pardon power abuse, but you can look at Manafort, Stone, other people who did not cooperate with the Mueller investigation. Basically, every defendant who we convicted, either at a trial or because they pled guilty, was pardoned. The people who cooperated were not pardoned. That is antithetical to law enforcement. So one shouldn't be surprised that for some of the nominees that you're seeing a recapitulation of exactly what we saw the first time, but with sort of shamelessness. That you have somebody like Peter Navarro, that you have Steve Bannon, other people who are either convicted or people who have been under investigation like Matt Gaetz, who are part of the clan for Donald Trump.
Here he was talking briefly on one of the programs, War Room, which is what Steve Bannon runs, and he was the other person who also took prison time for defying the probe, about personnel and policy and how they view all this. Take a look.
Personnel is policy. This goes back to Reagan. Bad personnel is not just bad policy, but it's bad politics. And one of the problems we had in that first term was just having a lot of deadwood in there who would slow down the Trump agenda because they thought they were better than they thought they got elected.
Yeah.
These are people now coming back in. Bannon still is awaiting a New York trial, so he's essentially tied up in that sense, legally presumed innocent there, and we'll see what happens in that case.
Right.
But what does this do to the environment in the White House, where not only is there the history you just cited, but you have people around who, yes, you can say they've paid their debt to society. That's how the system works. But the entire attitude is anti-law, anti-law enforcement, anti-cooperation with these obligations, while they are, in some sense, part of the branch that is supposed to, as it says in their oath, take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Well, I think big picture, you can look at some of the proposed nominees as really running on what Steve Bannon has sort of coined as burn it all down. They're not just people who are not qualified. They're people who are running and being proposed to run an agency, and they're antithetical to that agency itself. RFK Jr., primary example, with severe, real health risks to the entire country, if not the world, based on that nomination alone. That's just within healthcare. You can say the same thing, though, for the Justice Department. Kash Patel would be, in my view, a prime example of posing that kind of risk. You don't put people who have either are criminals or completely incompetent in charge of the national security and law enforcement apparatus of this country. And I'm going to borrow a comment from Tim Miller, which is, if this is what it takes for the country to sort of wake up, that's the road we might be on, where sort of the burn it all down makes people realize that, bureaucracies are flawed, but it's better to have some kind of functioning government than to live in complete chaos.
Right, and we're all going to cover and live through this and see what happens. I want to play one more moment from that original interview, because he was quite stark about what they intended to do when they lost.
Have the battleground states challenge the results. That would trigger 24 hours of hearings. Mike Pence's job at that point was to take 10 days and go back and give the state legislatures, who really are the ones who have the power to determine whether an election is fraudulent, to give them a second look.
This was the government side of the coup and sort of creating reality, trying to commit elector fraud in other ways and then just claim power. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but how do you view this if those are now the people back in the White House with future elections?
Well, one of the things is what you had him say, and I mean, he volunteered it. It's his sort of like, you didn't force him to make these kinds of damning admissions, is the way that prosecutors make cases and the way they prove up something is by having people who are, especially people who used to be in government, tell the truth about what happened. So he's saying, I have all this information that he was unwilling to give it to Congress. That's an obligation that we all have, absent a lawful privilege. He did not have a lawful privilege. And now having somebody in the government having that view, which is that you just don't have to abide by the law, to me, it's of a piece with, as I said, the president-elect himself. I mean, you have to remember, he is a convicted felon. So the idea that we shouldn't be surprised that some of the proposed people have that same background.